Why did her voice matter now, when they had rifles, grenades, and crumbling courage? Because words outlasted bullets, and her squad needed something to outlast the night. The barricade shook as another impact rattled through the buildings. Plaster rained down. A window shattered overhead, glass tinkling onto the street like falling stars. Movement, Pike hissed, peering over. Shapes emerged from the dust. Figures, dozens of them, marching in formation, rifles ready, helmets glowing faintly in the haze. Behind them, the silhouette of armor loomed, low, broad, unmistakably heavy. The medic swore under his breath. Ramirez's hand tightened around his weapon. They weren't supposed to be here. Not this many, not this close. Command had promised the area was clear. But Command wasn't answering anymore. "Captain," Ramirez whispered, "we can't hold against that. You know we can't." His eyes begged for something. Permission to run, to fight, to do anything but sit here and wait for the storm. Elise didn't answer right away. She studied the advancing shapes, the rhythm of their movement, the faint shimmer of heat above their armor. She measured distance, counted rifles, noted where the street bent left and disappeared into darkness. Options, always options, even when it looked like there weren't any. She lowered back behind cover and finally met Ramirez's gaze. "We can." The two words landed like a stone in still water, ripples through every man crouched in that space. Ramirez shook his head. "No, Captain, listen, we're dry. I've got maybe one mag left. Kole's out of bandages. Pike." Pike cut him off, growling, "Shut it. She said we can, so we can." His tone was harsh, but Elise saw it, the flicker in his eyes. He wasn't scolding Ramirez. He was clinging to her steadiness like a rope in rising water. Kole finished tying off the bandage and leaned back, sweat dripping from his temple. "Captain, if we're holding, then tell me how, because right now I don't see it." Elise breathed once, slow. The weight of their stares pressed against her like the rubble above their heads. She wanted to tell them the truth, that there was no backup coming, that the silence on her comm wasn't interference, that it meant they'd been written off, left to their fate just like her unit a decade ago. But she didn't, not yet. "Hold your fire," she said instead. "Wait until they're close." Pike blinked. "Close, they'll mow us down before." "They'll expect panic," she cut in, calm, steady. "They'll expect us to waste what we have. We wait. We choose the moment, not them." Silence settled, doubtful but waiting. And under it, her own thoughts whispered louder than gunfire. 10 years ago in that desert she hadn't waited. She'd panicked, fired too early, spent too much. And when the armored convoy rolled over them, all she had left was a smoking rifle and bodies in the sand. She wouldn't make that mistake again. The rumble grew louder, boots striking pavement in unison, the rhythm of an army confident in its advantage. Elise peeked over again. The enemy filled the street now, their lines cutting through smoke like a blade. The armored vehicle behind them groaned, its cannons swiveling as if searching for a target it had already chosen. Her squad's breath synced with her movements, waiting, watching her. She pressed her cheek against the rifle stock, eyeing the sights, centering on the lead soldier. The reticle steadied, her breath even. But she didn't fire, not yet. A whisper escaped her lips, softer than the dust falling around them. "Not yet." The enemy drew closer, 30 meters, 20. The clatter of their gear audible now, the scrape of boots sharp against asphalt. "Captain," Ramirez's voice shook. "Not yet." 15 meters. Elise could see their faces now beneath the helmets, hard, set expressions. Soldiers who thought this was already over. 10 meters. And then, now, the barricade erupted. Every rifle in her squad opened at once, a chorus of defiance. Muzzle flashes ripped through smoke, bullets cutting down the front rank in a storm of sparks and blood. The enemy staggered, some falling instantly, others diving for cover they hadn't expected to need. The street transformed from confident march to chaos. Shouts, screams, gunfire echoing wild. "Reload," Elise called, already shifting her sights to the second wave. Calm, steady, guiding them through the storm. Ramirez fired until his rifle clicked empty, then jammed another mag with shaking but determined hands. Kole, who barely shot in training, leaned over the barricade and squeezed off rounds with a snarl. Even Pike, hardened and weary, shouted curses between bursts of fire that cut through the advancing line. Elise didn't shout. She didn't need to. Her voice threaded between the cracks of chaos, anchoring them. "Left flank adjust. Keep low." Ramirez breathed. They listened. And for a moment, just a moment, the impossible seemed possible. The enemy stumbled. The armored vehicle hesitated, its cannon swiveling in confusion. The squad felt something they hadn't in hours. Hope. But Elise knew better. She always knew better. This was only the beginning. Her finger pressed the trigger, dropping another soldier who'd raised his weapon toward Kole. She shifted, sighting again, body moving with a rhythm burned into her bones, precise, controlled. Yet underneath the precision, her chest tightened. Her thoughts whispered the words she refused to speak aloud. "This isn't going to last." The barricade shook again as a shell slammed into the building across the street. The blast threw debris, rattling their cover. They ducked, dust and glass rained. The bleeding corporal groaned, clutching his wound. Elise stayed upright. "Eyes on me." Her voice cut through the ringing in their ears. They lifted their heads, focused again. She met each gaze briefly. Ramirez, Kole, Pike, the wounded man, each one looking to her for something she wasn't sure she had left. But she gave it anyway. "Calm, steady. We hold until the end." Her voice didn't break. And as the dust cleared, revealing the armored cannon now trained directly on their barricade, Elise whispered words no one else heard. "A promise. Not like last time." What did you say to your squad when a cannon was aimed straight at their barricade? Nothing if you didn't believe in them. But Elise Ward had never been the kind to stay silent. The armored barrel fixed on them, its black mouth wide as death itself. Even Pike, the veteran who'd laughed off mortars in another lifetime, froze. His curses died on his lips. Ramirez's hands trembled so badly his magazine clattered against his rifle. Kole pulled the wounded corporal down, shielding him with his own body as if his frame could block a blast. Elise stood tall. Her eyes traced the cannon, then the street. She noted the angle, the building walls, the narrow alley just to their left. Options, always options, but each one came with a cost. "Captain," Pike whispered, not a growl this time, not defiance, a plea. Elise inhaled, slow, calm, measured. She remembered the desert again, 10 years ago when an armored cannon like this had turned a barricade of trucks into fire and bodies. She remembered her mistake, shouting, panicking, ordering a scatter that led to slaughter. Not this time. Her squad's eyes were wide, waiting for her. She spoke. "Stay low, hold." The cannon fired. The world exploded. The barricade didn't vanish, not entirely. The shells slammed into the wall behind them, blasting stone and dust into the air. The concussion wave slammed her to the ground, ears ringing, lungs burning. She tasted dirt, grit between her teeth. But the barricade held. Ramirez coughed, spitting blood. Kole groaned, clutching his head. Pike was already dragging himself upright, deaf but alive. The corporal screamed faintly, muffled under debris, but he was still breathing. They were all still breathing. Elise forced herself up. Her ears roared, but she steadied her stance. Dust swirled thicker than before, choking vision, turning the world into a shifting blur. The enemy advanced through it, silhouettes rising like ghosts, dozens, maybe more. Her squad blinked through the haze, disoriented. Elise's voice cut through. "Eyes forward, they're coming." The words pulled them back. Even half-deaf, even coughing blood, they focused on her tone, calm, unbreakable. Pike fired first, rounds sparking against armor. Ramirez followed, his magazine steady this time, no tremor in his grip. Kole dragged the wounded corporal back into cover, then snatched his pistol and fired into the haze, shouting hoarse defiance. And Elise fired with precision. Every shot measured, every movement deliberate. She moved like a conductor leading an orchestra, her squad following the rhythm of her calm. But beneath the steadiness, her chest burned. Because she knew this couldn't last. The cannon roared again, slamming into another building, tearing it apart. The street rumbled, bricks and beams collapsing in a cascade. The enemy pressed harder, shouting commands in a language her squad didn't understand. Ramirez shouted over the chaos, "Captain, what if we fall back? The alley." Elise's eyes snapped to him, not with anger, with steel. "If we fall back, they'll flank us. We hold." Ramirez bit his lip but nodded. He didn't argue again. The medic looked at her differently, though. Cole's eyes searched hers, seeing more than the others did. He caught the flicker, the ghost of something unspoken. He whispered, "You've seen this before." Elise froze for half a beat. Her rifle fired again, dropping a soldier who'd broken cover. But his words echoed louder than the gunfire. Yes, she had seen this before. And she hadn't saved them. Her mind yanked her back. 10 years ago, a sunburnt sky, a convoy of trucks turned to twisted metal, radios silent, air support gone, 26 lives under her command, and a decision she made too fast. She ordered them to scatter, thinking movement would save them. It hadn't. The cannon had cut through them like wheat. Men she'd trained with, laughed with, brothers she'd sworn she'd bring home, gone. Only 5 survived. And of those 5, only she carried the blame. She never spoke of it, not once. But here, now, it was happening again. She blinked hard, dragging herself back to the present. Kole was still watching her. His eyes demanded an answer she wouldn't give. Not yet. "Focus," she said instead, calm as ever. And then she raised her voice, steady and clear. "On my mark, suppressing fire, 3, 2, 1. Her squad fired together. A storm of bullets ripped into the advancing soldiers, forcing them back, buying precious seconds. Elise scanned the smoke, searching for something, anything, that would give them an edge, and then she saw it. The armored vehicle's treads. One pressed against a slab of rubble. The angle was bad, the weight uneven. Her mind raced, a weakness, small but real. She dropped lower, signaling Pike. "Grenade left side now." Pike didn't hesitate. He yanked a grenade, teeth gritted, and hurled it low. It bounced once, twice, and vanished under the vehicle. The explosion rocked the street. Shrapnel tore, smoke belched, and for a moment, just a moment, the armored beast lurched, one tread locked, screeching against stone. The squad erupted with a cheer. Ramirez whooped, firing harder. Kole shouted something triumphant, adrenaline cutting through fear. Even Pike let out a ragged laugh. Elise didn't cheer. She just breathed, calm, steady. Because she knew this wasn't over. The vehicle wasn't destroyed, just slowed. The enemy still pressed forward, angrier now, more determined. But that moment of triumph, it mattered. Her squad needed it, needed proof that survival was possible. And that was her job, not just to fight, not just to lead. To keep hope alive. Even when she doubted it herself. The enemy regrouped, firing harder, rounds pinging against their barricade. Ramirez cried out, clutching his shoulder where a bullet had grazed him. Kole dragged him down, applying pressure with hands already stained red. Pike cursed, returning fire with fury. Elise crouched beside them, scanning the haze. The cannon was moving again, slowly, grinding back into position. They didn't have long. Her voice carried once more. "Listen to me, we are still here, we are still breathing. That means we are not done." Her squad froze, listening. You don't break until I say you break. You don't fall until I fall. Understood. One by one they nodded. Even Ramirez, blood seeping through his uniform, clenched his jaw and whispered, "Understood." Elise's chest ached, not from dust, not from fear, from the weight of their trust. Because she still hadn't told them the truth. She hadn't told them what it cost her last time. And maybe she never would. The cannon steadied again, the enemy regrouped, the fight was far from over. But her voice held them together, a thread binding four broken men to something larger than themselves. And as the cannon's shadow loomed once more, Elise whispered words only she could hear. "A vow. This time, no one gets left behind." The valley was quiet, too quiet, but anyone who had been in war long enough knew that silence was rarely peace. It was usually a trap. Elena knelt in the dust, her rifle balanced steady, the weight of it pressed against her shoulder like an anchor. The sun burned high overhead, and yet her skin felt cold, her pulse steady but low, like a hunter who knew the prey was watching her as much as she was watching it. The team fanned out behind her, small silhouettes moving cautiously across the jagged ridge. Every stone, every shadow felt alive. She didn't need orders. Instinct told her to pause to study the land. And then she heard it, the faintest rattle of loose gravel, the kind that only came when someone was trying too hard to move silently. Her hand lifted flat sharp, a stop signal. Every soldier froze. The valley wasn't empty, it was waiting. Elena's mind flickered back to the briefing. Intelligence had marked this valley as a choke point, a place where supply convoys had vanished, where no patrols returned. Command suspected an insurgent stronghold hidden deep within the rock walls. Her orders were simple on paper: clear the valley, confirm the stronghold, report. But simple was a word that never belonged on a battlefield. She studied the horizon again. The jagged cliffs rose on either side like broken teeth, perfect ambush territory, perfect killing ground. Her voice, low but firm, broke the silence. "Eyes up, stay low, we're not alone here." No one questioned her. They trusted her instincts. They had learned quickly that when Elena spoke in that clipped, certain tone, it meant the line between survival and disaster was razor thin. They moved slowly, deliberately, like whispers threading through stone. Dust crunched beneath boots, but otherwise, the only sounds were their breaths and the low groan of the desert wind. Elena's eyes swept the ridge again, and there, just for a fraction of a second, sunlight caught on glass, the glint of a scope. "Down," she shouted. The world exploded. Gunfire tore through the silence, bullets sparking off rock, dust clouds erupting into the air. Echoes ricocheted like 1,000 thunderclaps trapped in the valley's throat. Her team dropped instantly, trained bodies reacting before thought. Elena pressed her cheek against the earth, scanning, calculating. The shots were coming from multiple angles. Not just one sniper, not just one squad. They were surrounded. Her throat went dry, but her voice was steady. "Return fire, suppress left ridge." Her rifle barked, sharp and precise. Each shot was deliberate, controlled. She wasn't just firing, she was carving out seconds, carving out survival. The firefight raged. Rocks shattered, dirt rained, the metallic tang of gunfire mixed with the acrid sting of powder. Shouts echoed from the cliffs, enemy commands in a language she didn't fully understand, but the meaning was clear. They were being funneled, pinned. A young private, barely 20, pressed close to Elena. His hands shook as he reloaded, fumbling with the magazine. His lips trembled as though he wanted to speak but couldn't form the words. His fear was raw, exposed. Elena placed a firm hand on his wrist, steadying it. Her eyes locked with his, calm, unwavering. "Breathe, focus, you're not alone." Something in her tone, something almost maternal yet unyielding, steadied him. His shaking slowed. The magazine clicked into place. He nodded, jaw tightening, finding a sliver of courage through her gaze. Minutes bled like hours. They pushed forward inch by inch, returning fire, shifting positions, never staying still long enough to become easy targets. But for every ridge they suppressed, another gun opened. The valley itself felt alive, its very stone conspiring to keep them trapped. Sweat dripped into Alina's eyes, stinging. She blinked it away, scanning for patterns, for anything that might break the stalemate. Then she noticed something. The enemy fire, though heavy, had rhythm, a rotation, as if they weren't just trying to kill them, they were hurting them. Her stomach dropped. This wasn't just an ambush, it was a funnel. "Fall back," she ordered. "Don't give them what they want." But retreating was never simple. The instant they shifted back, fire rained harder, cutting off the path they'd come from. They weren't being allowed to escape. The valley wasn't a battlefield, it was a cage. The radio crackled, a sergeant's voice breaking through static. "Command, this is Echo Squad. We are pinned in the valley, heavy resistance, multiple nests, requesting immediate support." The response came after a delay that felt like a lifetime. "Negative Echo, air support unavailable. Closest reinforcements are 2 hours out." 2 hours? They wouldn't last 20 minutes. Alina clenched her jaw. She didn't waste breath cursing command or fate. Instead, she scanned again, searching, thinking like the enemy. If they were being funneled, then there was a destination, a kill zone deeper in, which meant maybe there was also a gap. Her eyes swept the ridge again and landed on a narrow fault line running jagged through the stone. It was risky, exposed, steep, but it wasn't covered as heavily, almost as if the enemy thought no one would dare cross it. Which meant it was their only chance. She leaned into the comm, her voice hard as steel. "Change of plan. We cut through the east fault. It's steep, it's ugly, but it's open. Cover fire on my mark." No hesitation followed. They trusted her more than the map, more than the orders from far-off command. They trusted her because when everything collapsed, she was still standing, unbroken. "Mark!" They surged as one, a desperate sprint beneath the hail of fire. Bullets whipped past, some finding flesh, some tearing cloth. A corporal staggered as a round grazed his shoulder, but Alina was there, arm hooking under his, hauling him forward with a strength that defied her size. They reached the fault line, scrambling up jagged rock, boots slipping, fingers clawing for holds. Enemy fire peppered the cliffside, stone shards slicing skin, but still they climbed. At the top, lungs burning, Alina rolled onto solid ground and pulled the wounded corporal up beside her. Around them, the squad regrouped, battered but alive. For a moment, only the sound of labored breathing filled the air. Then Alina spoke, voice ragged but fierce. "We're not done. They think we'll break, but we're still here, and as long as we're here, we fight." Her words weren't shouted, but they carried. They sank into bone, into marrow. The squad straightened, eyes hardening, the fire in their chests rekindled. From the ridge, Alina looked back into the valley. The enemy was regrouping, their trap disrupted but not abandoned. Smoke drifted through the broken echoes of gunfire. She realized something then, something chilling. This valley wasn't just meant to kill, it was meant to erase. No survivors, no witnesses. Her mind flashed again to the briefing, to the bland words of intelligence reports and mission statements. She understood now. Command had known the risk. Maybe they'd even expected Echo Squad not to return. A cold fury coiled in her chest, but she forced it down. There would be time for reckoning later. For now, survival came first. She adjusted her grip on the rifle, eyes narrowing at the cliffs beyond. The fight wasn't over, it had only shifted. The valley had tried to break them, but it had failed. And Alina, she was far from finished. The ridge stretched before them like the spine of some ancient beast, its jagged edges cutting into the sky. From up here, the valley below looked less like terrain and more like a scar carved into the earth, a reminder of every soldier who had bled into its dust. Alina knew their escape wasn't victory. It was only a pause, a breath stolen from the jaws of a trap. The squad gathered in the thin strip of shadow cast by the cliff face, battered and bloodied, but alive. Alive because they had trusted her. She checked them one by one, her hands steady even as her heart ached at every wound she catalogued. The corporal she had dragged up the fault line was pale, his shoulder wrapped in hastily applied gauze. The young private she had steadied earlier sat with his back to the rock, rifle across his knees, lips pressed in a thin line of determination. He was scared still, she could see it in his eyes, but fear was no longer consuming him. It was fuel now. Elena adjusted her rifle strap and turned her eyes to the horizon. The enemy hadn't followed immediately. That alone was telling. If they had wanted a slaughter, they would have pressed harder. No, they were letting Echo Squad move, guiding them still. The valley hadn't been the kill zone. It had only been the threshold. The sergeant crouched beside her, voice low. "What's your read, LT? They had us dead to rights back there. Why let us climb out?" Elena's eyes never left the cliffs beyond. "Because they want us to keep going. There's something deeper in these mountains. A stronghold, a cache, maybe worse." The sergeant frowned. Command said reconnaissance only. Confirm and report, not walk into the lion's den. Her jaw tightened. Command also said this valley was light resistance. Look where that got us. The words hung in the dry air like smoke. She didn't say the rest, they knew. They sent us anyway. They moved cautiously along the ridge, keeping low, every sense stretched to the breaking point. The landscape shifted as they advanced, rock narrowing into winding paths, shadows lengthening like reaching fingers. Hours passed, the sun dragging itself across the sky until finally Elena saw it. At first it looked like nothing more than a crack in the stone, but the closer they came, the more unnatural it seemed. Carved lines smoothed by human hands, metal embedded where no metal should be. A narrow entrance, camouflaged but not perfectly. The stronghold. Elena's chest tightened. This wasn't just a camp. This was infrastructure carved into the bones of the earth itself, and the enemy had wanted them here. She raised a fist, halting the squad. "Eyes up, this is it." They crept closer, weapons raised, until the crack in the rock yawned into a doorway, a mouth swallowing light. Cool air seeped out from within, carrying the scent of oil and dust. Inside, the fortress breathed. The walls were stone and steel, rough-hewn but reinforced. Crates stacked high bore markings she didn't recognize, symbols etched in paint, worn by years but still legible. Ammunition, medical supplies, maybe even weapons they weren't supposed to have. Her fingers brushed the crate's surface. Whoever these insurgents were, they weren't just scavengers. They had supply lines, organization, backing. Backing that went deeper than command had admitted. The young private whispered behind her, voice trembling despite his effort to control it. "Ma'am, what is this place?" Elena's throat tightened, but her voice was steady. "It's the reason we're here." They advanced deeper, boots echoing against stone floors. The corridors twisted, stairwells leading down, always down. The fortress wasn't a bunker, it was a labyrinth. And somewhere within it, Elena knew, lay the truth command had buried beneath sterile mission reports. As they descended, scraps of sound reached them, muffled voices, machinery humming, the clang of metal on metal. The enemy was here, working, unbothered by the firefight above. That alone told her everything. The ambush hadn't been about protecting this place. It had been about testing Echo Squad, drawing them inward. At the next turn, she held up a hand. Shadows moved ahead, 3 figures, armed, walking casually down the corridor. Guards, but not tense ones. They weren't expecting resistance this deep. Elena's eyes flicked to her squad. No words were needed. They moved like a single breath. The fight was swift, brutal, and silent. Knives flashing, grips breaking necks, muffled cries swallowed by stone. When it was done, 3 bodies lay still, hidden against the wall. The squad's breaths came harsh in the silence. Elena pressed a hand to the young private's shoulder. His knife dripped, his face pale, but his eyes no longer wavered. He had crossed a threshold of his own. She gave him the smallest nod, acknowledgement not praise. Then she whispered, "On me." The deeper they went, the stranger it became. They passed rooms stacked with weapons crates labeled in languages that shouldn't have been here. Medical supplies stamped with insignia Elena recognized not from insurgent stockpiles but from official military shipments, shipments that should have been secured, not in enemy hands. Her blood ran cold. This wasn't a hidden enemy fortress. This was a hidden exchange. The realization struck like a blade. Someone in command was feeding them. Her fists clenched so tight her knuckles whitened. She forced her breathing steady. Not now. Anger could wait. Survival couldn't. They moved further still, until the corridor opened into a cavernous chamber. It was vast, an underground hangar hollowed from stone. Floodlights hummed overhead, casting the space in sterile white. At the center stood a massive piece of machinery, bristling with cables and armored plating. Not a vehicle, not a weapon she recognized. Something else. Her squad fanned out, eyes wide. "LT," the sergeant breathed. "What the hell is that?" Elena stepped forward, heart hammering. She didn't have an answer, but she knew this. Whatever it wasn't meant to stay hidden forever. And the enemy hadn't brought them here to destroy them. They had brought them here to witness. Her comm crackled suddenly, static tearing through the silence. A voice bled through, low, deliberate, unmistakably human. "Echo Squad, you found it good. Now the real test begins." Every muscle in Elena's body went rigid. The voice wasn't enemy. It was command. Her squad froze, looking to her for direction, confusion and fear etched across their faces. Elena's eyes never left the machine. Her mind raced, the betrayal cutting sharper than any bullet. The mission had never been about reconnaissance. It had never been about survival. It had always been about control, about seeing how far she would go. The chamber seemed to pulse with silence. Her hands tightened on her rifle. Her spirit trembled at the weight of revelation. But her will did not break. The voice still crackled in her ear, jagged with static but undeniably clear. "Echo Squad, you've proven yourselves. Now stand by for instructions." Instructions. The word burned like acid in her chest. Her fingers flexed on the rifle stock, the metal warm beneath her palm. She glanced at her squad, Ramirez wide-eyed, Kole frozen mid-step, the sergeant's jaw tight with restrained fury. They had all heard it, and none of them understood. How could they? They hadn't seen the crates, hadn't read the markings, hadn't recognized the subtle betrayals she had pieced together in the dark corridors. They didn't know what it meant that command's voice was waiting here, inside an enemy fortress, whispering approval. But she knew, and the knowledge hollowed her. The chamber's silence pressed against her ears, broken only by the low hum of the machine in the center. Floodlights glared down, casting shadows sharp as blades. The sergeant finally broke it, voice rough, heavy with disbelief. "LT, what the hell is going on? Why is command in our comms? Why here?" Elena's throat worked, but no words came. The voice returned before she could speak. "Captain Ward, you've led them well. Now order them to stand down. This is bigger than the squad, bigger than the war you think you're fighting." "Bigger?" Her teeth clenched at the word. How many times had she heard it, in different tones, in different contexts, always the same dismissal? Bigger than the truth, bigger than the lives lost, bigger than the soldiers buried in sand and stone because someone in a distant office decided they were expendable. Her chest tightened, but her breath stayed steady. She couldn't let them hear the storm inside. Ramirez stepped forward, eyes darting between her and the shadows. "Ma'am, what's happening? Why are we?" His voice cracked. He looked younger than ever in that moment. A boy dressed in fatigues, staring at a world that didn't make sense. Kole muttered bitter, almost a growl. "They knew they set us up. That's why the valley was crawling. That's why the comms went dark. The sergeant's face was stone. LT, I need you to tell me straight. Are we still following orders? The question sliced through her like a blade. Orders, the lifeblood of every soldier, the foundation of discipline, of survival. Orders kept the chaos contained. Orders gave purpose when fear threatened to consume. But orders had also led her squad into that valley, had bled men and women dry in the desert years ago, had buried truths under polished metals and press releases. Orders had betrayed them. Her pulse pounded in her ears, a relentless drum. She thought of the corporal bleeding on the ridge, the fear in Ramirez's eyes, the steadiness of Pike despite the weight crushing them all. She thought of her own past, the silence of the desert, the faces she could still see at night, the names she whispered like penance. Her squad wasn't expendable, not to her. The comm crackled again. Captain Ward, this is your final warning. Stand down, secure the site and wait. Reinforcements are en route. Non-compliance will be considered treason. The word landed like a hammer, treason. Her chest rose, slow, steady. Her voice, when it came, was calm, deliberate. Treason against what? The silence that followed told her everything she needed to know. The machine hummed louder, as if aware of the confrontation building around it. Cables pulsed with faint light, energy running like veins beneath armored plating. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a symbol, proof of betrayal, proof of complicity. Her squad shifted, restless, waiting for her call. She could see it in their eyes, the need for direction, the fear that if she faltered they would shatter. Elena lifted her rifle slowly, leveling it at the machine. No. The word wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. It was steady, sharp, final. Her squad straightened, understanding without explanation. The comm erupted. Ward, that's an order. You will stand down. She exhaled through her nose, gaze locked on the machine. I don't take orders from ghosts. For a moment, everything was still, the kind of stillness that comes right before the world fractures. Then gunfire erupted. Shadows spilled from the far side of the chamber, enemy soldiers, alerted, converging. The squad dove for cover, the thunder of rifles echoing against stone walls. Bullets sparked against crates, ricocheted off steel. Kole dragged Ramirez down, shielding him with his body. Pike returned fire with precision, every shot controlled, measured. Elena fired steady bursts, her voice cutting through chaos. Left flank cover. Ramirez, keep your head down. Kole on me. They moved with her rhythm, not because of orders, but because her calm gave them anchor. The machine loomed behind the storm of bullets, its hum now a roar, as if mocking them. Between volleys, Elena's mind raced. If command had orchestrated this, if the enemy had allowed them to reach this chamber, then destroying the machine wasn't just survival, it was defiance. It was truth carved into stone. Her heart hammered, her hands were steady. They fought their way forward step by step, every movement costly. A graze across Kole's arm, a ricochet slicing Ramirez's cheek, Pike grunting as a round clipped his vest. But they held. They always held. Finally, they reached the base of the machine. The roar of combat echoed around them, but here, close enough to touch it, Elena felt its power vibrate through her bones. She reached into her vest, fingers closing around the last shaped charge. The weight of it was heavier than any she'd carried, not because of its size, but because of what it meant. Her squad's eyes locked on her, no words, just trust. She placed the charge. The comm shrieked with command's voice, raw with fury. Ward, stand down. Do you understand what you're doing? This is bigger than you, bigger than them. You'll damn us all. Her hand lingered on the detonator. Her voice was quiet, almost gentle. No, you damned yourselves. She squeezed. The explosion tore through the chamber, a concussive wave that shook stone and steel alike. The machine screamed as it ripped apart, fire spilling from its veins, smoke filling the air. Her squad was thrown to the ground, ears ringing, lungs searing with heat and dust. But they were alive, and when they staggered to their feet, coughing, blinking through the haze, they saw what she had done. The machine was gone, and with it command's control. For a long moment there was only silence, the kind of silence that wasn't empty but full, thick with shock, with disbelief, with the weight of what had just happened. Her squad stared at her, faces lit by the glow of flames. Ramirez was the first to speak, voice raw, awed. "Captain, you just—" She cut him off softly, firmly. "We move now." Because she knew this wasn't over. The enemy would come, command would come. But for now, for this moment, they had chosen something no one could strip from them. They had chosen truth. And her voice, calm and unbreakable, had carried them through. The fire hadn't even finished devouring the machine before the mountain began to answer. The ground shuddered under their boots, a deep, rolling tremor that rattled stone from the ceiling. Smoke rose in thick curls, clinging to the air, choking the chamber with the stench of scorched metal. Sparks hissed from broken cables, dripping like angry fireflies into the wreckage. Elena's squad stood stunned in the glow. Pike's jaw was clenched so hard his teeth might have cracked. Kole pressed a cloth against his bleeding arm, his face pale but his eyes fixed on her like she was the only thing holding the world upright. Ramirez just stared at the flames, lips parted, trembling like a man staring at something sacred and terrifying all at once. Elena didn't let herself stare. She couldn't afford awe. She couldn't afford regret. She kept her eyes on the smoke-thickened exit and the faint thunder of boots echoing closer. "Move," she said, steady even. "We're not done." The calm roared to life again, a voice so sharp it cut through the fire. "Ward, you've crossed a line you can't return from." She didn't answer, not aloud. But her silence carried weight. Her squad saw it, felt it. They pushed through the corridors, smoke curling after them like a pursuing beast. Every twist of the passage revealed more, rooms filled with crates, weapons, supplies that shouldn't exist here. Evidence. Proof of betrayal carved into wood and stamped onto metal. The sergeant spat into the dust as they passed. "Whole damn place is a lie." Elena kept her breathing steady, but inside her chest, something cracked. A lie, yes, but whose? The first wave of reinforcements hit them halfway up the corridor. Shouts, muzzle flashes, the crack of rounds ricocheting against stone. Elena dropped low, her rifle barking controlled bursts. Ramirez cried out, not in pain but in shock as he saw the enemy's insignia, patched uniforms not of insurgents but of official forces. Kole swore under his breath, "They're ours, they're wearing our colors." Her chest tightened. She had known. A part of her had always known. But hearing it from him, seeing it reflected in the disbelief on Ramirez's face, it cut deeper than the bullets sparking off the walls. She fired again, the report steady, her voice slicing through chaos. "Doesn't matter what patch they wear. They're between us and the exit. Keep moving." They obeyed, not because they understood, but because her voice left no room for doubt. They fought through corridors thick with smoke and betrayal. Every corner turned revealed another squad, another firefight, another moment where the weight of truth pressed harder against her chest. At one point, they ducked into a side chamber, breaths ragged, walls vibrating with the clash of boots and gunfire outside. Kole leaned back against the wall, blood seeping through the cloth on his arm. He met her eyes, his voice low, raw. "Tell me, LT, just tell me the truth. Are we fighting the enemy or are we fighting them?" The question hung heavy in the smoke. Ramirez looked from one to the other, his face pale, his youth carved raw by fear. Pike didn't speak, but his eyes demanded the same answer. Elena's chest rose, fell. She felt the weight of the desert years ago, the silence that had haunted her since. She could lie. She could soften it. She could protect them from the crushing truth a little longer. But the flames behind them had already burned the lie away. Her voice came quiet, steady. "We're fighting to keep each other alive. That's all that matters now." Silence followed, thick but not empty. They understood even if they didn't want to. The firefights blurred together, moments of terror and calm, of instinct and command. But in every clash, every frantic sprint through smoke and stone, one thing never wavered: her voice. Even when her body ached, even when fear gnawed at the edges of her calm, even when the truth felt too heavy for her chest to bear, her voice stayed steady. "Cover left. Push now. On me." And every time they listened, because in her voice was something command couldn't fake, couldn't manipulate. "Trust." They reached the upper levels at last. The air thinned with altitude, fresher but sharper, laced with the scent of fire from below. Gunfire still rattled the corridors behind them, the enemy, or allies, still pressing, still relentless. The squad spilled into a wide cavern near the mountainside. A single jagged opening bled daylight into the stone, cold wind slicing through the smoke. Freedom, close enough to taste. But the exit wasn't unguarded. Figures stood silhouetted in the light, rifles raised. Uniforms familiar, insignias sharp. Not insurgents, not strangers, soldiers who should have been brothers. The sergeant muttered a curse, his voice shaking with rage. "They're waiting for us like we're criminals." Ramirez's hands trembled on his rifle. "What do we do, Captain?" Elena stepped forward just far enough that the light framed her silhouette. Her voice was calm, deliberate, unbreakable. "We walk out together." The enemy shouted commands, orders to drop weapons, to surrender, to lay down arms and kneel. Elena's squad shifted, uncertain, eyes darting between her and the soldiers blocking their path. She didn't lower her weapon. She didn't raise it either. She simply stood tall, breath steady, shoulders squared. And then quietly she spoke, not to the men in the light, but to her squad. "They'll call us traitors. They'll write it in reports. They'll twist every word until no one remembers why we stood here. But we will know. We'll know the truth. That's all that matters." Ramirez's jaw trembled, but he lifted his rifle, not in defiance but in solidarity. Kole pushed off the wall, wincing, his wounded arm steadying his weapon. Pike spat once into the dirt, then leveled his aim with the precision of decades. They stood beside her, not as soldiers obeying orders, but as people choosing each other over the lie. The standoff stretched like wire pulled too tight. The wind howled through the cavern mouth. Smoke curled upward in faint streams, carrying the smell of betrayal with it. Elena's breath never faltered. Her heart thundered, but her voice, when she finally spoke, was soft enough to make the cavern listen. "This is where we stand." The soldiers in the light shifted, their rifles quivering just slightly. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw doubt in their faces. For a heartbeat, she thought her calm had reached them. Then the world erupted again. Gunfire tore the silence apart. They moved as one. Training, instinct, trust, it all collided in a storm of survival. The cavern became a battlefield, daylight slashing through smoke as bullets sparked against stone. Elena's voice anchored them through it all. Commands, warnings, encouragement, every word a lifeline in the chaos. Her squad fought not for orders, not for command, but for each other. And through the storm, Elena held fast to one truth. No matter how many turned their rifles on them, no matter how many reports branded them traitors, her voice would not break. Because it was all they had left. And in that moment, it was enough. She hadn't expected the silence to weigh so heavily. The convoy was gone. The last extraction bird never made it through. Static filled her comms, broken only by distant artillery thumps that echoed like a fatting heartbeat. Somewhere below the ridge, the team she had promised to guide out was scattered, clinging to cover, praying that someone, anyone, still had a plan. Her breath was steady, but her chest tightened with every second that passed. She was the last one with eyes high enough to see the bigger picture, the last voice still clear on the net. And yet, what haunted her wasn't the responsibility itself. It was the memory of another night, years ago, when she had frozen. Her mind tried to drag her back to it. A village in dust and fire, screams she couldn't reach in time, the weight of not acting fast enough, the shame of silence when action was demanded. Now that ghost pressed on her shoulders again, whispering doubt. But she forced herself to blink, adjust the scope, and focus. Down below she could see a figure crawling, moving wrong. Not one of theirs. The enemy was pushing, tightening the noose. If she hesitated, it would cost them all. Her finger rested against the trigger, light, trembling just enough to betray the battle inside her. And then a voice crackled through. One of the younger soldiers, breathless, terrified. "Ma'am, we're pinned. I don't know if we can hold." The words almost broke her. For a heartbeat, she wanted to say nothing, to vanish, to let someone else answer. But there was no one else. She swallowed, leaned into the mic, and let her voice out. Steady, calm, controlled. "You're not alone. Listen to me. I see you. I've got you. Hold." The pause after her words stretched like a test. Then came a shaky reply. "Copy." It was small, barely audible, but it was enough. She exhaled slowly, pressed the trigger, and the first crack of her rifle rolled down the valley. A single shot, a single answer to their fear. And in that moment she felt the tide shift, not outside, not in the battle itself, but inside her. Her silence had ended. Yet she knew the night wasn't done testing her, because the hardest part wasn't shooting, it was speaking. Speaking when her throat burned with doubt. Speaking when others' hope hinged on every syllable. She didn't know if she could carry them all the way, but for now, she had given them something to hold on to. And in war, sometimes a steady voice was worth more than 1,000 guns. The thought almost steadied her until another sound reached her ear. Not gunfire, not explosions. But her name, whispered over the net, from someone who should have been gone. She froze, listening, every nerve awake. Because if that voice was real, then the past hadn't finished with her yet. The dust had settled, but the silence was heavier than the battle had ever been. No more gunfire, no more orders barked across the net, just the aftermath, the weight of what remained and what didn't. She sat with her back against the shattered wall of the outpost, her rifle across her lap, the comm unit still clutched in her hand. The antenna bent, scorched, almost useless now. Yet she couldn't bring herself to set it down. It had been her lifeline, her weapon, her burden. Around her, the survivors gathered slowly, like shadows returning after a storm. Faces streaked with soot and exhaustion. Eyes hollow, but alive. Alive because she had spoken when silence would have destroyed them. They didn't say it out loud. They didn't need to. Every glance in her direction carried it, the unspoken acknowledgement that her voice had anchored them when everything else had crumbled. But inside her, the conflict hadn't ended. Her hands shook when no one was looking. Her chest ached with the memory of every command she gave, every reassurance she whispered when she wasn't sure she believed it herself. She had carried them with words, but each word had cost her something. And now, in the quiet, she felt those costs gather like a tide pressing against her heart. Someone sat beside her, Ramirez, the youngest of the team. His face was pale, his sleeve bloodied where a bullet had grazed him earlier. He didn't look at her at first, just stared at the horizon, the smoke curling upward in the distance. Then softly, almost like he was afraid to break the fragile air between them. "Ma'am, when you spoke back there, I thought," he stopped, swallowed hard. "I thought maybe we had a chance." She turned her head, studied him. He was barely more than a kid, carrying a rifle that seemed heavier than his frame could manage. And yet in his voice she heard something she hadn't expected. Gratitude, relief, a trace of belief. It should have comforted her. Instead, it broke something open. Because she remembered a time when she had been like him, looking up to someone else, clinging to a voice that felt unshakable. And when that voice had faltered, when silence had left her stranded, she had sworn she'd never put her faith in anyone again. But tonight she had been that voice, not because she wanted to, not because she thought she could, but because there had been no one else. Her reply was quiet, roughened by fatigue. "You gave yourself that chance. I just reminded you it was still there." He looked at her then, and for a brief moment his eyes softened, as if he understood more than his years should have allowed. The others began moving, scavenging supplies, marking the dead, preparing for whatever came next. The war wasn't over. It never truly was. But in this pause, in this fragile silence, something lingered. Her gaze drifted upward. The sky was shifting, the first hints of dawn brushing pale light across the edges of night, and she realized how long they had fought in darkness, guided only by flashes of fire and fragments of hope. The sun didn't bring peace, it brought clarity. And in that clarity she saw herself, not as the broken shadow she feared, not as the silent figure haunted by old mistakes, but as something else. A reminder, a presence. Not unbreakable, not invincible, just steady enough when it mattered. The kind of steady that kept others breathing. Her throat tightened, but this time not with doubt, with something else. A strange, fragile pride, not for herself, for them, for the fact that they had endured, that she had been able to stand with them even when every part of her wanted to disappear. The mission reports would never capture that. The brass would never understand what it meant to hold people together with nothing more than words. But the soldiers who had heard her voice in the darkest hour, they would remember. And maybe that was enough. She closed her eyes, leaned her head back against the crumbling wall, and let the silence settle fully around her. Sometimes dignity didn't speak in shouts or triumphs. Sometimes it whispered. Sometimes it carried others quietly through the fire. And sometimes dignity didn't speak at all. It simply acted,